Hollow Moon Tales. We call it the North, but that word doesn't do the cold any justice. I was assigned to a fire tower in northern Alberta for 2 winter weeks, the kind of shift most rangers trade away if they can. On paper, my job was routine: count elk and wolves from elevation, note snowmobile tracks, watch for illegal traps, radio in the weather. Off the record, everyone knew why I was the one up there. 2 trappers had gone missing past the tree line east of the lake. A pilot spotted their sleds abandoned, and their trails just ended. No scuffle marks, no sign of a thin ice breakthrough. Just a clean white erasure where footprints should have continued. My wife thought I should refuse the posting. She grew up a few hours south in a Cree family that taught winter like a second language. She never dramatized anything, never raised her voice, just said what her grandmother had told her. Stay fed, keep your fire, answer no voice that comes from the tree line after dark. I told her I'd be careful, and that old stories were old for a reason. Caution in a code of myth. She looked at me a long time and said, "Some things are called stories because that's the only way to talk about them." I promised I'd keep the radio on. The tower stood in a stunted ring of black spruce, steel legs splayed into frozen ground, a winding set of graded metal stairs that sang under every step. From the cab, the world was a map of white and charcoal, the lake a plate of dull metal in the daytime and a breathing bruise at night. Wind worked the guy wires, so the tower sang. Not a pretty sound, a drawn, low note that made your teeth ring. First night, I heard it underneath me, not the wind. Something heavy taking its time on the snow. 5, 6 steps, a long stillness, then one more. I let the flashlight hang from my wrist and worked the beam through the slats, half expecting to catch a moose shoulder or a wolf's winter coat. Nothing. The second night, about the same hour, I heard slow weight circling the base again, then a dull thunk against steel. I told myself it was ice sheeting, wind shift, anything that ended the thought I didn't want. I wrote "windborne ice" in the log and underlined it twice. I slept in my boots after that, stove on low, radio crackling with distant weather, and nothing human. The cold went to work on my hands. The skin between thumb and index fingers split like paper, and every time I unscrewed the thermos, salt burned the open seams. I kept the door barred because the old hinges shrugged against the frame when the gust hit, and because on the morning of day 3, I found prints all around the lowest landing. Not even prints, more like long, shallow ovals where something heavy pressed and dragged under its own weight. The ovals kept their distance, sweeping a wide circle, then crossed one another and simply stopped at the wind-scoured face of the lake. No step away, no step back, just a white blank, like a page deliberately left unfinished. That afternoon, the tower creaked more than usual. It has a voice you get used to: bolt shift, cable hum, stair vibration. This was none of those. It was a high, thin scrape that began above my head and traveled down the door, a slow zipper of metal on metal. I waited with my palm against the wood, counting my own breath into the glove to keep it quiet. The scrape returned, lower, patient. When I eased the door open with my shoulder braced, all I saw was gray daylight and the stairs swing in their cage. The inside face of the door had 3 lines in it, parallel and too widely spaced for any hand I know. I took a ruler to them because measuring is what you do when you don't want to name a thing. 7 inches center to center. I wiped the door and my cloth came back with a thin black-brown smear I didn't want to think about. I locked the door again and radioed headquarters anyway, gave them the temperature and the wind and the visibility, and not one word about what my stomach wouldn't let me say. The sun went down fast and flat. You don't get a sunset that time of year, so much as a room light switched off in the next house over. Night raised its shoulder against the glass and held it there. Around 1, the wind died like someone pinched its throat. The tower went from singing to listening. A soft gravel sound began under the floor, dragging, no hurry, a lazy circle around the legs. The stove ticked as it cooled, and I let it. Fire is a friend until it isn't. I wanted quiet, every sound laid bare. A while later, the scrape came again, this time with a second sound tied to it. A hard, hollow knock at the end of the stroke, as if something tapped wood against steel to test the echo. Tap, pause, tap. Longer than fingers, I thought. Longer than any animal's claws up here. I told myself, again, that words like animal and human are sometimes just laziness when you don't know the right name. The radio hissed, then coughed alive. A man's voice found its way through the static. Hello? Anyone on frequency? The pitch was low and careful, a voice you put on when you don't want to spook the person who's going to save you. I'm hurt. I can see a light. Please. I can't feel my hand. My mouth worked before my head did. This is Ranger Post North 1. Give me your position. Static. Then, light straight ahead. I can walk. He sounded 20 minutes out at most. In that cold, 20 can do damage you don't take back. The rule is simple. You go if you can go. I layered up. Thick wool, parka, a scarf I never wear because it makes me think of goodbyes. I took the first aid kit and flares and the short rifle by the door because we have wolves and men make mistakes around wolves. I killed the stove, killed the lamp, and killed the lie that I wasn't afraid. Outside, the stairs tried to throw me. The rails were a skin of glass. My breath hit the air and became a small storm around my face. At the foot of the tower, I raised my headlamp to the tree line and called into the dark. Talk to me, keep talking. The radio answered in my chest pocket. Here, please. It was the same words, same order, a choir solo recorded and played again. No wind, no wire hum. Even the snow stopped its tiny sounds. The headlamp's beam cut into old breath, turning in the branches. I took 12 steps and decided to take only 12 more. At step 14, the radio went quiet, and the same voice came from the trees, not from a point, from the shade itself. Here, please. I stopped. Something in me that is older than training told me to make myself small, to listen with my skin and not my ears. My scalp prickled like it had grown a field of needles. My neck got that slow, warning heat that should come before a fire alarm. My heart climbed up out of its lane and beat in my throat. The night wasn't silent. It was busy with a silence that had things inside it. I turned my head just enough to break the tunnel and caught, at the top edge of my light, a mat shape splitting away from the trunk of the spruce. It had been pressed there without a sound. It unglued itself from bark, like night peeling off of night. The first thing I saw clearly was a hand, not gloved, long bone under tight skin, cords of tendon shining with frost, nails like thin horn. It held a carved stick as long as my arm, beads and old feathers knotted near the head. The rest of it unfolded in pieces the light didn't want, out and down and too far. A frame like starvation, made to stand. Ribs pressing a ribbed shirt that once had beadwork I couldn't read. Tatters moved without wind, as if the cloth remembered motion. The head lifted last, hair in matted plaits, cheekbones too sharp for a living man. The mouth unfastening with a dry sound, slow, wider, a hinge past any hinge. When it breathed in, it made a wet creak, and when it let that breath out, I heard my own words come back at me in the same order. Talk to me. Keep talking. I stepped back, and the snow under my heel collapsed with a soft complaint. It didn't lunge. It didn't need to. It angled the stick and dragged its tip in a lazy crescent over the crust, the beads clicking together like quiet teeth. Somewhere behind me, the radio found its voice again and chattered with the weather station, as if the world had chosen to go back to normal without me. I did not run then. I have never been more ashamed of how long I did not run. My legs had opinions my mind couldn't vote down. Then it made a sound from inside its mouth that was almost a laugh, and not a laugh at all. And everything inside me, everything my wife's grandmother had put there with a sentence and a look, turned and went. I didn't remember deciding to move. I remembered the pain in my lungs and the ice tearing at my knees as I clawed up the metal stairs two at a time, the clang echoing like a bell the whole way, slamming shoulder and hip into the door, the bar dropping, the lock finding the hasp with hands that were no longer fingers. The tower shook, not from wind, from weight moving with a careful rhythm on steel, a long, patient scrape of wood against the door, slow, then a measured tap at the end. The beads clicked again, same small teeth. I pulled the rifle into the crook of my arm and did not point it at the door, because I could not bring myself to decide whether a thing that looks like a man from far away is a thing you fire at from near. It circled once, twice. Each time it passed the window, the shadow thinned and then thickened, as if the darkness wanted to keep it. The scraping changed key, higher, lower, then stopped. A long, slow breath pressed through the seams, not loud, just there. The smell came next, sour fat and old smoke, and something sweet that didn't belong to food. I put my forehead to the wood and kept it there because it kept my head from floating away. Minutes or hours later, I still don't trust the time I wrote in the log. The scrape started again from the far corner, smaller now, a child's version of the same motion. Then silence, so clean I could hear the frost form on the window. I stayed at the door anyway. I wasn't choosing bravery. I was choosing the greed of one more second I knew how to name.
Dawn took the color out of the night without giving much back. I unbarred the door on a hinge that protested like a waking knee. The stairs were clean. The platform was not. A bow-shaped mark arced across the threshold where the stick had worried the metal, and there was a small bundle set neat at the corner where my boot always landed when I swung inside. Twine of sinew, feathers bent and tied, 2 little bones crossed and resin bright, a twist of dark hair knotted clean through. I didn't touch it. I didn't move it. I just looked at it until my throat was dry, then radioed headquarters with a weather excuse. Iced stairs, wind picking up, visibility falling. I told them I was cutting the shift short for safety. They didn't argue. Back home, I put the parka over the chair and stood in the kitchen longer than a man should stand and told my wife small parts of a larger thing. I said there'd been a voice on the radio and I'd found nothing where a man should have been. I said the tower had taken a beating in the night and there'd been something left for me on the platform. She listened without blinking. Then she put water on the stove and placed both hands flat on the table and said, "You answered, not a question." I told her I had tried not to. She nodded and said nothing for a long time. We moved closer to town before the thaw. I turned down 3 winter postings in the years after, and when my supervisor finally asked me if I'd forgotten how to be useful, I said I'd learned how to stay alive. The trappers were written off to exposure and misadventure, the file closed with the kind of words paper likes. But people still vanish in those forests. A snowmobile found idling by a stand of birch, a set of tracks that go up a light distance and then stop without apology, a tent flap cut from the inside. There's always an explanation if the only explanations you'll accept are the ones you already have. Me, I keep a different rule now. I don't say the winter names after dark. I don't open a door because a voice near the trees learned how to use the radio. And if a tower sings when the wind dies, I let it sing alone. Once, I told my wife that maybe I'd write it down clean for the report, put it to bed with the right words. She shook her head and said, softly, "Some things are called stories because that's the only way to talk about them."